Welcome to your channel. Times were tough, but we learned to stretch every penny and every crumb. But times are changing. People are worried about the economic crises the country is going through. Prices are going up, and some are scared they won't be able to put food on the table. These recipes are simple, affordable, and most importantly, they're filling. So, come on in, and let's take a trip back in time and learn how to eat well, even when times are tough. The cake was a lifesaver during the Depression. Back in those days, people had to make do with what they had, and that often meant getting very creative in the kitchen. Eggs, butter, milk, those were luxuries we couldn't always afford. The shelves were often bare, and families had to stretch every dollar and every ingredient. So what did we do? We got creative. We found ways to make delicious treats without the usual ingredients. This special cake, it's made right in the pan, no need to dirty extra dishes. It's a one-pan wonder that saves time and effort. You just mix the dry ingredients, flour, sugar, cocoa powder, baking soda, and a pinch of salt. These are all basic pantry staples that were more accessible. Make 3 little wells in the dry mix oil, vanilla, and vinegar. Each well holds a key ingredient that helps the cake rise and gives it flavor. Pour some water over the whole thing, mix it all up, and pop it in the oven. The water activates the baking soda and vinegar, creating a light and fluffy texture. In about half an hour, you've got yourself a delicious, moist cake that'll satisfy your sweet tooth without breaking the bank. It's a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of those tough times, and it's just as delightful today. Potato pancakes. They were cheap, plentiful, and could be stretched to feed a whole family. You start by grating some potatoes, just like you would for hash browns. Mix those potatoes with a little flour, an egg if you have one, and some salt and pepper. Heat up some oil in a pan, drop spoonfuls of the batter onto the hot surface, and fry them until they're golden brown and crispy. Serve them hot with a dollop of sour cream or applesauce, and you've got yourself a meal that's fit for a king. Now, old-fashioned cornbread. That was a staple in our house. All you need is some cornmeal, flour, a little sugar, baking powder, salt, and some milk or water. Mix it all up, pour it into a greased pan, and bake it in the oven until it's golden brown and pulling away from the sides. You could eat it warm with a pat of butter, crumble it into a glass of cold milk, or serve it alongside a pot of beans or a bowl of soup. It was a versatile dish that always hit the spot. Chipped beef on toast. Meat was a luxury during the Depression, something we didn't have very often. Families had to be resourceful and creative with the limited ingredients they had. But when we did, we made sure to stretch it as far as it would go. Every morsel was precious, and nothing went to waste. You'd take some dried beef, thinly sliced, and simmer it in a little bit of water until it was tender. This process helped to rehydrate the meat and make it more palatable. Then, you'd make a simple gravy with butter, flour, and milk, seasoning it with salt and pepper. The gravy added richness and flavor, making the dish more satisfying. The chipped beef would go into the gravy, and then you'd ladle it over slices of toasted bread. The toast provided a hearty base that soaked up the savory gravy. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, comforting, and it made a little bit of meat go a long way. This humble dish became a staple for many families, a symbol of resilience and ingenuity during tough times. Coffee soup. This recipe comes from my Pennsylvania Dutch neighbors. Now I know what you're thinking. Coffee soup? It's simple, warming, and surprisingly delicious. You start with a pot of hot, strong coffee, the kind that'll put hair on your chest. Then you whisk in some milk, sugar, and a pinch of salt. Slowly drizzle a beaten egg into the hot coffee while whisking constantly so it forms silky strands. It's like a warm hug in a mug, perfect for chasing away the chills on a cold day. Poor man's meal. This recipe, it's near and dear to my heart. It's more than just food, it's a piece of history, a slice of life from a time when every meal counted. We ate this all the time during the Depression. It was a staple in our household, a dish that brought us together even in the toughest of times. It's cheap, it's filling, and it uses ingredients you probably already have on hand. Potatoes, onions, and hot dogs, simple yet so satisfying. It tasted like $1,000,000. The flavors melded together perfectly, making every bite a delight. You start with some potatoes, diced up small. The smaller you dice them, the quicker they cook and the crispier they get. Fry them up in a pan with a little bit of oil until they're nice and tender. The aroma of frying potatoes and onions is simply irresistible. Then you add some sliced hot dogs. These add a bit of protein and a lot of flavor to the dish. Cook everything together until the hot dogs are heated through. Stir occasionally to make sure everything cooks evenly and gets a nice golden brown color. It's a humble meal, but it's full of flavor and always brings back good memories. Every time I make it, I'm reminded of the resilience and love that carried us through those hard times. Hoover Stew. This stew, it wasn't exactly a favorite, but it was a lifeline for many during the Depression. It was made with whatever they could get their hands on: macaroni, hot dogs, canned tomatoes, corn, sometimes a few other vegetables. It wasn't fancy, but it was filling, and it provided some much-needed nourishment during those lean times. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there were people who cared, people who worked hard to make sure that no one went hungry. Cabbage soup. Now there's a vegetable that saw us through some tough times. It was cheap, it kept well, and you could make a whole pot of soup with just one head. You start with a simple base of onions and carrots sautéed in a little bit of oil. Then you add water or broth, chopped cabbage, and whatever other vegetables you have on hand. Just let it all cook down until the cabbage is tender and the flavors have melded together. It's a simple soup, but it's so comforting and satisfying. Dandelion salad. Now, when you think of salad, you probably think of lettuce and tomatoes. But during the Depression, we had to get creative. That's how we discovered the wonders of dandelion greens. We'd gather them up, give them a good wash, and toss them with a simple vinaigrette. It might sound strange, but dandelion greens have a slightly bitter, peppery flavor that's actually quite delicious. And they're packed with vitamins and minerals. Vinegar pie. Fruit was a rare treat during the Depression, especially fresh fruit. So when we wanted a taste of something sweet, we had to improvise. That's how vinegar pie came to be. You'd make a simple crust with flour, lard, and a bit of water. Then you'd mix together sugar, water, a little cornstarch, and of course, vinegar. Pour that mixture into the unbaked pie crust and bake it until it's set and bubbly. The result is a pie with a surprisingly delightful sweet and sour flavor. Meat and potato patties was a luxury during the Depression, so we had to make it last. One way we did that was by adding ground meat to our potato mixture, creating these savory and satisfying patties. You'd start by boiling and mashing some potatoes, just like you would for mashed potatoes. Then you'd mix in some cooked ground beef, onions, maybe a little bit of leftover gravy if you had any. Form the mixture into patties and fry them in a pan until they're golden brown and crispy on the outside. Navy bean soup. Beans, the musical fruit. They weren't exactly musical, but they were a lifesaver during the Depression. Navy beans in particular were a pantry staple. You'd start by soaking the beans overnight to soften them up. Then you'd simmer them in water or broth with some diced onions, carrots, and celery. Let it simmer for a few hours until the beans are tender and the flavors have melded. It's a simple soup, but it's so nourishing and satisfying, especially on a cold day. Stuffed peppers. Bell peppers, with their vibrant colors and slightly sweet flavor, were a welcome addition to our Depression-era meals. And when they were stuffed with a savory mixture of rice, ground beef, and tomatoes, they made a meal that was both filling and delicious. You'd start by browning some ground beef with onions and garlic. Spoon that mixture into halved bell peppers. Arrange them in a baking dish and bake them in the oven until the peppers are tender and the filling is heated through. It was a simple dish to make, but it was always a hit with the family. Goulash. It's a delicious dish and all love it. It's a one-pot wonder that's perfect for feeding a crowd, and it was a lifesaver during the Depression. You'd start by browning some ground beef in a large pot. Then you'd add onions, garlic, and your favorite seasonings. Tomatoes were a must, whether they were fresh, canned, or even just a can of tomato soup. Just let everything simmer together until the noodles are cooked and the flavors have melded. Peanut butter bread. Now, this bread, it might not sound like much, but it was a special treat during the Depression. Peanut butter, you see, it was relatively inexpensive and could add a boost of flavor and nutrition to our meals. You'd start with the usual bread ingredients: flour, sugar, salt, baking powder, and a little bit of milk. But the star of the show was the peanut butter. You'd mix it right into the dough, giving the bread a wonderful nutty flavor and a slightly sweet aroma that filled the house as it baked. Life, it's full of surprises, isn't it? We never know what tomorrow might bring, but there's one thing I've learned in my many years. It never hurts to be prepared. Just like we learned to do during the Depression, we can all benefit from being resourceful, adaptable, and maybe even a little bit thrifty. Stock your pantry with some simple staples, learn some new recipes, and don't be afraid to get creative in the kitchen. Thanks for watching.